Hi there.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sure.
I was looking back at some older interviews of yours, and you were talking about how Titus got the job in part because you'd seen him in a couple of episodes in Touch, and you thought this is someone I think who might be able to play Harry Bosch. I'm wondering, after all these years, what has he brought to the role that maybe you didn't see back then, or that surprised you?
Well, I would say most of his career up until that point, obviously was character actor stuff. And I would say 80% of it was being a villain. And it's easier, back when he was cast, I was not Mr. TV. I'm not Mr. TV now, but I know a lot more about it. And I know a lot more actors. And it's kind of a standard thing. It's easier to play a villain than a hero or a good guy. And I think if what I didn't see coming is how good he would be at playing a good guy. And I just think his internal mechanisms and projection of internal issues with Harry Bosch are pretty magnificent. And, that's what I thought I could see in Touch, but it was about a guy with PTSD. And he projected that extremely well in that show. But there's much more to Harry Bosch than PTSD. There's a lot of internal stuff going on, and he's able to show that without saying it. And so I got way more than I thought I'd get when I saw him in Touch, and very kind of hesitantly threw his name into the hat when we were talking about casting Harry Bosch.
I'm curious. It's an interesting dynamic because this is a character you're still writing books. There's a book coming out, I think, about 3 weeks that has him in it, and there's the written Harry Bosch, and then there's the TV Harry Bosch, which aren't always the same. And when you're sitting down to write a novel, is it easy for you to sort of keep that in mind, or does one influence the other?
Well, definitely one influences the other. It's definitely a two-way street. I don't necessarily see Titus because I had an imaginary Bosch in my head for 20 years before Titus was cast, but I hear his voice. His voice he's got a great voice, and to me, it's the voice of Harry Bosch, and that's a really important part of in the writing process. So I do have that influence from him. But there's a gulf in the age. The guy I'm writing about in my books is 73 years old, so he's much older than Titus, much older than the Bosch in the TV show, and so that separation really helps a lot. In the books, Bosch is dealing with health issues and the things that happen to people when they're in their 70s. And so that's a whole different ballgame, and we don't have to worry about that for the show. I'd love to, in 10 years, have the show going and have to deal with that. I'm sure Titus would too, but that's for later on, and that's a big maybe. But something about the age difference really lets me separate the shows, separate the characters, I guess you'd say, when I'm writing. So it doesn't really intrude that much.
Well, you mentioned that you know a little bit more about TV than when you started. I mean, you've done some other projects before this, and some of the authors I've spoken with, they're not that involved with their TV series. They're a producer. They come on the set. They, maybe talk a little bit about what's going on. Don't really deal with some of the day-to-day stuff. And I get the impression that that's not you at all. Can you just sort of talk about your process of how involved you are on the show? And
yeah, I mean, well, it's changed over the years. I mean, we've been very lucky that we're writing what amounts to the 10th season of Bosch. In the beginning, I was a full-timer. I had invested over 20 years. At that point, I had invested more than 20 years in Harry Bosch. So I wanted to be there. I thought to protect them. It turns out I didn't have to protect them because the people in the room wanted to protect him. They cherished this character and they wanted to realize him on film. but it's also a fun thing. Writing books is a very solitary experience. You're by yourself, being in a room with, I was a newspaper reporter for a long time, and so going into a writing room, 6 or 7 writers and assistants and so forth, I harkened back to the camaraderie of being in a newsroom, and so I really enjoyed it. So I was there all the time. But I came to realize I don't have to be here all the time, because I can trust these people. And we've had some writers that have gone the whole distance of the 9 to 10 seasons, and the showrunner has, and we've added a writer that was there from the beginning. He's now co-showrunner. And so I don't really have to be there. So I have to step back. Also, I've aged myself. I'm 67. Most people are thinking about retirement at 67. And so I don't have to be there. I trust the people are be there. So where I am of value, I think, at least, and they would have to confirm or deny this, is in the early stages, when we say, what are we going to do this season? And we talk about what books to adapt from. But in Bosch Legacy, for example, we're dealing with 2 characters that are way ahead of anything I've done in my books. Money Chandler was only in 1 book. And so, yes, she's drawn some from the Lincoln lawyer character, but she's really her own character. And Maddie Bosch is a little bit older and further along than the Maddie Bosch in the books. For example, she was a police officer in the TV show before she was a police officer in the books. And so it's really the conceptual stuff at the beginning. What do we do? Where do we take these characters? I like to have a say in that. But do I have to be in the writing room every day? No. I'm probably on average in the writing room 1 to 2 days a week, and I might not even last the whole day. And I don't have to be. I trust these people. They are the torch carriers of Harry Bosch when it comes to TV, and I'm very happy and confident in that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the second season. You mentioned Maddie, and that her storyline sort of frames a lot of what is happening in season 2. And I mean, was that something that was conscious when season 1 wrapped up, of, oh, this is where we're going to be going?
Yeah, I mean, we have this like kind of newfound freedom. For 7 years, it was the through line is always Harry Bosch, and then Freevee came and said, we want to continue the show, but we want it to really be a three character lead. And Bosch is probably always going to be the center of the wheel, but in different seasons we can move someone else to the center of the wheel. In season 2, it's obviously Maddie. And the one that we're just starting to put together, I think it's going to be Money Chandler. And that is refreshing, and it's what got us this new show. This idea that we can pass the baton depending on what we want to do. Bosch will always be there. Bosch is interconnected with everybody, but that's our challenge, is to figure out how to make this a 3 lead show where the 3 characters don't go off on separate paths. It's always intertwined. You got to bring them, you got to cross paths all the time. You got to have, very consciously, we think about, where are we having all 3 characters in one scene? Where are we having 2? We're predisposed not to like a lot of storytelling with only 1 character. And writers water seeks its own level. For years it was all about Bosch. Let's try a year where it's all about Maddie. Let's try one where it's all about Chandler. And that's how I think this show will proceed and be successful.
Well, some of your novels sort of have that aspect as well, of taking different characters from different books and bringing them back, or and it seems like it's a pretty easy through line to what the show is as well. It's not that far away from what you would be doing in a book.
Yeah, true. I mean, I write like I like to read. I love that when I'm reading a series or something and there's cross connections, and they're like payoffs for sticking with the writer. Like I remember that from that character from this other book and so forth. That's always, I've always loved that as a reader. And so I do it in my books. And the show does that as well. But in the show, for example, Money Chandler, I don't know if people remember this, but she was only in one book. And look at what we've done with her in the TV shows. And now she's like the bona fide lead, co-lead of this new show. So that's all like stuff that's not in the books. And that's fun to do. There's not, I haven't written a perfect book yet. That's my goal someday, to write a perfect book, but I probably won't ever hit that. And so it's fun to go to these things and explore new ways of telling the same story, or correcting and telling it in a better way. And I really feel that the books we've adapted, we've told in better terms than I accomplished when I just wrote the book. So that is extremely fulfilling to me.